Okay, so let's picture the early 19th century. The air is just thick with sea salt and gunpowder. It's the chaotic, absolutely brutal world of naval warfare. And right at the center of it all is a man who, really, by all accounts, probably shouldn't have even been there. Today, we're going to unravel the incredible paradox of Horatio Nelson. And boom, this quote just drops us right into the middle of the action. This is from the Battle of Trafalgar, which was Nelson's final and most famous victory. Cannonballs are ripping through his ship. His own secretary was literally just cut in half right next to him. And this is what he says. Just pure, unbelievable coolness under fire. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The shocking difference between the legend and the actual man. On one hand, you've got the myth, right? The British bulldog, the admiral so feared, the French basically called him a force of nature. But on the other hand, you have the man himself, small, always sick, and physically just shattered by war. So the question is, how on earth did this fragile man become such a titan? Well, to even begin to understand the legend, you have to get inside his revolutionary mind. See, he didn't just play the game of naval warfare, he completely flipped the board over with a strategy he called the Nelson touch. So you've got to understand, before Nelson, sea battles were kind of polite, predictable things. Two neat lines of ships just firing at each other. Nelson hated predictable. His big gamble was to charge straight at the enemy line. It was a crazy, almost suicidal move that exposed his ships to a ton of fire. But if he could just break through, he could turn that orderly battle into a chaotic, messy brawl, where he knew his better-trained gunners would just annihilate the enemy. And if you want to know just how devastating the Nelson touch could be, look at this. At Trafalgar, after taking a real beating on the approach, his flagship, HMS Victory, finally breaks the enemy line. It unleashes a single, perfectly aimed broadside down the whole length of the French flagship. The result? In a matter of seconds, almost 400 enemy sailors were just gone, taken out of the fight. That's the power of that gamble. But you know, this kind of glory, this willingness to just charge headfirst into cannon fire, it comes with a price, a huge one. And Nelson didn't just survive his wounds. It was almost like he collected them. Okay, so get this. During a raid on Tenerife, a musket ball shatters his right elbow. The ship's surgeon has to take the arm off. It took 15 minutes. No anesthetic, nothing. And Nelson's only complaint? The knife was a bit chilly. He later nicknamed his stump my fin. I mean, the toughness is just unbelievable. And then, of course, there's the legendary story of his blind eye. During a tough battle at Copenhagen, his superior officer signals for a retreat. But Nelson, he's convinced he's about to win. So what does he do? He just lifts a telescope to his blind right eye and says, "I really do not see the signal." He kept fighting, and yeah, he won. It's the perfect example of his defiant, never-say-die attitude. But beyond those famous injuries were the hidden agonies he dealt with every single day. He had a permanent hernia so bad he had to wear a leather corset just to kind of hold himself together. He had a nasty head wound that left a flap of skin dangling over his forehead. And maybe the biggest irony of all, Britain's greatest sailor in history was chronically, miserably seasick for his entire career. So let's just put all this into perspective. If Nelson were to be evaluated by a modern military board, his disability rating would be over 140%. That's not a typo. By any measure, he was a walking catalog of trauma, held together by nothing but sheer willpower. But if Nelson was a god on the battlefield on dry land, oh boy, he was an absolute mess. His personal life wasn't just complicated, it was the biggest scandal of the 19th century. While he was stationed in Italy, Nelson falls completely in love with Emma Hamilton, who just so happened to be the wife of the British ambassador. But instead of some quiet, secret affair, the three of them, Nelson, Emma, and her much older husband, Sir William, entered into this very public, very unusual arrangement. They all lived together, went out together, and Nelson even had a daughter with Emma. And this created a massive split back in Britain. The general public, they absolutely adored Nelson the war hero. They couldn't care less about his private life. But the establishment, we're talking the king, the court, the government, they were completely horrified by what they saw as his shameless, open immorality. And this disapproval, it had real tragic consequences. On his deathbed, Nelson's dying wish was for the government to take care of Emma and their daughter Horatia. But the establishment that he'd so offended, they just ignored him. The family of the nation's greatest hero was left to die in poverty. It's just heartbreaking. And that brings us right back to where this all had to end, on the deck of the HMS Victory, at the Battle of Trafalgar. This is the moment where the myth and the man, the hero and the wreck, finally come together. A French sniper high up in the rigging spots the small man with the missing arm and all the glittering medals. The shot is perfect. It severs his spine. But as he's falling, Nelson's first instinct is to cover his face with a handkerchief. Why? So his men wouldn't see their admiral was down and lose heart. He was carried below, and he managed to live just long enough to hear that his crazy, audacious plan had worked. The enemy fleet was totally defeated. His last words were simple, but they really tell you everything about the man and what drove him his whole life. Thank God I have done my duty. In the end, for him, that was all that mattered. Which, of course, leaves us with a really fascinating final question. Was his greatness something that existed in spite of his physical weakness, his constant pain, and his scandalous life? Or was it precisely because of those things? Because he had to overcome so much, is that what actually forged him into the legend we remember today? It's a paradox as complicated as the man himself.